Thank you for being here, for engaging, and for caring about the future of our schools. Let's go ahead and get started. Just a few guidelines. So, our moderator present. A moderator will be present in the chat to guide discussion and manage questions. Please direct all questions to the moderator rather than speaking out of turn. You will notice that when you entered, your microphones were muted. That is to ensure smooth flow and minimize interruptions, and all participant microphones will remain muted during the session. Human rights concerns. If you have any concern about potential human rights violations, please contact our Human Rights Officer, Marina Howlett, at howlettmarina@gmail.com. Recording notice. Once again, this call is being recorded for documentation and learning purposes. Please keep this in mind as you participate. And lastly, respectful engagement. Treat all participants with respect. Listen actively and keep comments constructive. And remember that diverse perspectives strengthen our learning. Our agenda for tonight. We've already gone through our rules and norms. We'll then have a human rights statement, our equity statement, our anti-harassment statement, a land acknowledgement, followed by our very special guests, Linda Busuttil, Chandra Pasma, David Mastin, Dr. Levac, and Dr. Myrie, followed by a general Q&A. So after each speaker, you'll all have 5 minutes to go ahead and put your questions in the chat. We know that 5 minutes isn't enough and we won't get to everyone's questions. So at the very end, we will have a general Q&A for 10 minutes where folks can go ahead and enter their questions in the chat. So if we don't get to you during the speaker that you wanted to ask, don't forget you have another opportunity towards the end.
I'm Rebecca Jameson. I'm on the executive for the Upper Grand Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario Union. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario is committed to providing an environment for members that is free from harassment and discrimination at all sponsored activities, fostering the goodwill and trust necessary to protect the rights of individuals and the organization, neither tolerating nor condoning behavior that undermines the dignity or self-esteem of individuals or the integrity of relationships, and promoting mutual respect, understanding, and cooperation as the basis of, I can't quite read that part, interactions among all members. Harassment and discrimination on the basis of a prohibited ground are violations of the Ontario Human Rights Code and are illegal. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario will not tolerate any form of harassment or discrimination as defined by the Ontario Human Rights Code at local or provincially sponsored activities.
It is the goal of the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario and affiliates to work with others to create schools, communities, and a society free from all forms of individual and systemic discrimination. To further this goal, ETFO defines equity as fairness achieved through proactive measures which results in equality, promotes diversity, and fosters respect and dignity for all.
Hello, my name is Aaron Anstead. I'm the interim president for Wellington OECTA, and I will be doing the land acknowledgement. Although this evening we gather virtually, and some of us find ourselves on lands covered by a number of different treaties, I would like to offer the land acknowledgement that we use at our association events in Guelph, whose lands are covered by the Treaty 3 or the Between the Lakes Purchase Treaty. This treaty is part of the larger Dish with One Spoon covenant, which covers territory from the Great Lakes to the St. Lawrence River and into the United States. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawaderon, Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, these treaty lands are steeped in rich Indigenous history and modern traditions. As a community, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, water, plants, animals, and ancestors. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit, on whose land Guelph presently sits.
At this time, I'd like to invite Amy, who will be reading an anti-harassment statement.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Reinders, and I'm here on behalf of the Ontario Secondary School Teachers Federation here in the Upper Grand District School Board. Everyone has the right to enter this space and it be an environment free from harassment and bullying. Harassment and discrimination are not joking matters. They have a destructive effect on individual well-being and meeting productivity. Such actions are not only destructive, they can be illegal. The organizers of this forum do not condone harassment or discrimination on the basis of age, national and ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, socioeconomic status, or mental or physical disability. Harassment and discrimination can take many forms. They can involve a wide range of actions, including comments, gestures or looks, pictures, messages, or more aggressive actions. Acts of harassment and discrimination are unwelcome and unacceptable. In organizing and participating in this forum, part of our goal this evening is to promote mutual respect and trust, to foster inclusion, and to protect and respect human rights. We cannot condone or tolerate intimidating, demeaning, hostile, and aggressive behavior against another participant. We hope that all participants in this evening's forum will respect this statement, respect one another, and respect our speakers. We are all here to listen and learn. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. At this time, we're going to go ahead and dive right in with our speakers. Just a reminder, there is going to be a 5-minute Q&A session at the end. Let's have a warm welcome for Linda Busuttil. Linda is a Guelph City Councillor who has represented Ward 4 since 2022. She served as the Upper Grand District School Board Trustee from 2006 until 2022, and as a board chair from 2017 to 2022. She was also the Provincial Ontario Public School Board Association Director from 2010 to 2016. Finally, Linda has been a long time and active volunteer in Guelph, particularly with the West Willow Village Neighborhood Group. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the introduction. The one thing that I would add is that I've also been a long time advocate for public education, daycare at the University of Guelph, around the Child Care Learning Center. And when I was younger, I also worked for the Wellington County Board of Education in the 90s, pre-amalgamation and adult education, put together education in the workplace in some of the factories, put together daycares in schools in Arthur, College Heights, and John F. Ross, so that adults could return to school. So I've been connected for a long time, although not currently, not directly involved in public education. So I think my perspective and what I'm going to talk about might be a little bit different. I think that everyone tuning in is connected in some way to education, so I'm going to be brief and get directly to the point. And I'm going to talk about the local voice from the perspective of trustee and boards of education. So do I think that a local voice and accountability has currency in the governance of school boards and education? And my response is just simply absolutely yes. Parents, guardians, stakeholders, communities, and yes, trustees are also the developers who advocate and respond to local student learning needs and the values that we as a community want to see in student learning. And especially in my experience, the Upper Grand District School Board. And I had the privilege of starting in 2006 as a trustee, and so got to know a lot of the trustees that were there in the old Wellington board in pre-amalgamation. And I love history, so the history of parent involvement and parents connecting with the education system. Stories like Deborah Whale in the county, who advocated for French immersion back in the 70s, before it was even on the radar of the provincial government. And the connection to Trustee Susan Mosier, who was a strong advocate in her years. We wouldn't have specialist high schools majors, Indigenous learning, mental health, equity. And for myself, I worked with the community on the International Baccalaureate program for 8 years. So elected trustees are about being here to connect and about making results. And sometimes the results take many years, like 8 years, but we're committed to moving public education forward. I think, again, it's going to be very obvious. Do I think this role can be achieved through a student and family support office who has absolutely no authority? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Do I think the Minister of Education can step into the role and fulfill this role? Again, absolutely not. And I think part of that is we live in the communities that we serve. And I think back to Wellington County, that is unique with our Mennonite community and the conversations and the currency that we build in the relationships and the trust. That isn't something that a Minister of Education in Toronto is going to be able to do, or someone in a student and family support office. That is about building relationships and connections for the betterment of public education and our students. Do I think that advisory committees, and we have lots of them in the Upper Grand, our First Nations, our equity, lots, do I think that advisory committees can step into that place, whether it's the Parent Involvement Committee? And again, there is no authority that are given to those advisory committees. And so the answer is no. I don't think they can fill that role of a school board trustee. So what is missing is that connection to the democratic process of electing representatives and the accountability of voting those individuals back out of office. I'm hoping that I'm not going to ruffle feathers, but I'm going to share with you in my 16 years as a school board trustee and also through the Ontario Public School Board Association, I have to say I'm not surprised by Bill 33 and where we find ourselves in education today. Former director was a good friend of mine, and we used to talk a lot about the 3 B's in governance: bricks, budget, and bargaining. And so when I look at our governance in education through bricks, budget, and bargaining in education, it seems pretty clear that the provincial governments, and I'm saying that plurally because it's not just the current government, have been on this trajectory for some time. Since the Mike Harris days in school board amalgamation, there has been austerity. There has also been a need for better governance. And I'm going to put that right out there because the governance is something I'm very passionate about. Not only because post-amalgamation we had bigger areas to govern, but also bigger budgets and complications. Complexities, not complications. So I remember when I started as a trustee, some of my respected trustee colleagues told me stories about budget nights in the old Wellington board, where trustees would deliberate which school got snowshoes or sports equipment, and bargaining was done directly between staff, trustees, and the bargaining units at a local hotel. With bigger boards, bigger budgets, came ministry direction to board governance to clearly separate strategy, risk, accountability, and local policy from the role of trustees and day-to-day operations. So you have a separation of the old Wellington board, post Mike Harris years of governance of operations as staff, governance, policy, trustees. But what you, and I'm sure you're all aware, we've also seen an increase in the ministry's centralization and central control. And just a bit of a pause, I did work for a number of years in the health sector. It's not just public education, it's also education, health sector, all of our public services, where there's increasing ministry, provincial or other government control and involvement. So I'm going to use that bricks, budget, and bargaining as the lens to kind of talk to you a little bit more. So bricks are more than capital funding for new schools. And just to illustrate the control, to submit a request for a new school, you have to submit a capital priorities, and you compete with other school boards, and this goes to the ministry. So we need a new school, we may not get it, someone else may get it. So sometimes it's political as well. There's also the funding to keep school infrastructure in good repair. So this is the bricks basket, which has been underfunded. And again, over 16 years of my time and working on budgets and so on, this includes the impact on our budgets when there are moratoriums on closing schools. So the provincial governments will say, no, not closing schools, but the expectation is you're going to use your bricks, your infrastructure funding to keep a school open, to transport students to a school that should be amalgamated or more efficient in terms of the way that you should be running your business of keeping costs and so on. So at every step of the way in that bricks basket, the province and the minister has control, approval. They've got their foot on the gas pedal to go forward or not. Budgets. So everyone knows that back in 97, I think it was, the amalgamation of school boards meant that the ability of school boards to tax was taken away. So the ability to raise funds was eliminated. And then what came in place were regulations requiring boards to provide a balanced budget. And you hear about currently the boards that are being taken over by the ministry. Until Bill 33, it was for financial reasons. Now there are many, many other reasons. So if there's a deficit, there must be a plan. Again, this is all in regulation, and the minister must provide approval. So I'm not sure if it's generally known that when a school board receives funding from the ministry, it's not a pot of money. It's not discretionary. It's the term I use is sweatered. So the government gives the school board money, and it is controlled and regulated. You know, when I plain language this, I say, that means you get money for 10 cookies and only 10 cookies, even though you need 15. And then the government will give you a list and say, and you have to purchase from this list where you get your cookies. And the cookies must be exactly alike. They need 10 chocolate chips and that's it, no more, no less. And you're going to spend time, accountability back to the ministry by filling in a report that you did everything that we wanted you to do. So it's no surprise that boards are experiencing deficits, but are just the symptoms of underfunding. So that is in the budgets, and that is also in the bricks. The last one is bargaining. And I had the privilege of being involved in the whole central bargaining process. And so the tripartite is the provincial government, the school board associations, and the bargaining units. And this is more than wages. This process includes, the levers of class size. And once again, the centralized control and the flow through to the school boards has not kept up with inflation, Canada pension, and other costs that have not been covered. So again, you're finding it feels like a manufactured kind of financial situation for school boards that they find themselves in. So I'm just going to take a breath here, and I'm going to conclude with, I do believe that there is room for improved governance at the school boards. I do believe that there is improvement or benefit to improving the skills needed to govern a large public corporation in the interest of public. But I don't believe in the elimination of local trustees, and definitely not the insertion of the Minister of Education into the governance and also the direct operation of the school boards.
Thank you so much, Linda. Thank you for, highlighting BRIC's budget and bargaining and how it impacts our schools. We're going to go ahead and open up right away to our Q&A for Linda's talk. Thank you. Mark, do we have our first question?
Sorry, I don't see it.
Okay, no worries. We can come back to the questions for Linda's session next. Thank you. Next slide, please. I'll go ahead.
Sorry, just having trouble moving the slide.
No worries. I'll go ahead and introduce, and then you can screen it after. Our next speaker is Chandra Pasma, the education critic. Chandra is a proven advocate for workers and people who need a helping hand. She serves as the official opposition critic for education. Before being elected, Chandra was a researcher with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, fighting to ensure that all Ontarians have access to high-quality, vital public services like healthcare, emergency services, and post-secondary education. Her report, Under Pressure, revealed the dire state of ambulance services in Ontario, squeezed by increasing demand, longer hospital offload times, and insufficient funding. Chandra served as an advisor to parliamentarians, delivering change on important issues like childcare, affordable housing, and employment insurance. Chandra has also been active for over a decade as an anti-poverty activist, fighting for the comprehensive solutions to ensure that everyone in our community can live in dignity. As a parent of 3 school-aged children, Chandra has seen firsthand the effects of the Ford government's cuts to education and healthcare on our local schools and the Queensway Carleton Hospital. Chandra is a tireless advocate for these and other public services that improve the lives of everyone in her community. Welcome, Chandra.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you tonight. I'm coming here from Toronto, but I represent an Ottawa riding, Ottawa West Nepean, which is on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. And as you just saw, I'm a parent of 3 kids, so I experience firsthand the challenges in our education system. But as the NDP's Shadow Minister for Education, I also speak daily with parents, teachers, and education workers and trustees across the province. And so I hear many stories about the challenges that our kids are facing right now. The Ford government has taken $6 billion in funding out of our education system over the last 7 years. And you can't take $6 billion out without having some pretty serious ramifications. So our kids are in larger classes. We're funding about 5,000 fewer educators every year. Kids aren't getting the educational assistance, the mental health supports, the special education supports that they need in order to succeed. And that frustration from unmet needs is leading to a crisis of violence in our schools. We're also seeing that our schools are not in a state of great repair. You know, we have crumbling schools, we have lead in the drinking water. But instead of taking accountability and reversing their cuts, investing in our schools so that our kids have the supports that they need in a safe and healthy school, the Ford government has been trying to distract from their record by attacking the rights of parents and students and communities to have a say in our local schools. So Bill 33, which was tabled by the government in May, gives the Minister of Education the power to put a school board anywhere in the province under supervision at any time for any reason that he wants. The legislation says that he can do it for a matter of public interest, but guess what? The Minister of Education defines what's a matter of public interest. And we can already see with Paul Calandra that there's no limit on what he will decide is a matter of public interest if it means that he can have more power. And what happens when a board is under supervision is that the elected trustees are swept aside, and the government can handpick an appointee who will oversee all of the decisions regarding the school board. So we are not just talking about budgets, as Linda mentioned. We're talking about hiring and firing. We're talking about the allocation of resources. We're talking about what programs are offered, which schools they're offered at, what the criteria are for children to enter various programs, what student transportation will be available to them, where new schools will be located, if the government is going to allow them to close schools, which schools will be lost, which school board properties can be sold off. Anything relating to our schools will be decided by this unelected person handpicked by the Minister of Education. And we can already see what our future will look like under Bill 33 from the supervisors that Doug Ford put in place earlier this year in the Toronto District School Board, the Toronto Catholic District School Board, the Dufferin Peel Catholic School Board, and the Ottawa Carleton District School Board, along with the Thames Valley District School Board, which was put under supervision earlier, which is that The Minister of Education is appointing people with no qualifications in education, no experience whatsoever supporting kids, and he's paying them $350,000 a year to make all of these decisions. All of them have some connection to the government, a former MPP, a federal candidate, a conservative donor, and a former staffer to Stephen Harper. So their qualifications are their ties to the party, not their experience in child well-being or in education. And these supervisors are making decisions in the dark behind closed doors. So they're not being transparent about what they're doing. They have restricted access for parents to meetings that are still taking place in public, but the supervisors themselves aren't attending meetings like the Special Education Advisory Committee meeting. They're not answering parents' emails and phone calls. They are not telling parents what decisions they've made or what decisions they're even considering. And in some cases, what public information is available is misleading, like in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board, where the supervisor said that he was making a decision based on extensive consultation, and everyone said, well, what consultation? I didn't know anything about it. And then it came out later that there had been no consultation. He was basing it on the consultations that had previously been conducted by the trustees that he was not part of. These supervisors have flat out said that they do not have to answer questions, but they're also making decisions that harm kids. So one of the first things that the TDSB supervisor did was to cut special education supports. He increased class sizes for those kids. In the Thames Valley District School Board, there are kids who are sitting at home because they have disabilities, and there's been no needs assessment to figure out what supports they need to even be at school. In the Dufferin Peel Catholic School Board, one of the first actions of the supervisor was to cut Indigenous education courses and to defund the new land-based school. Paul Calandra said these supervisors needed to be in place because these school boards had deficits. These supervisors are not making decisions that are related to deficits. They are making operational decisions that reflect the government's ideology. So this is the kind of centralization of power that the government envisions for education with Bill 33. They know that Bill 33 isn't popular. Students, parents, teachers, and education workers have all come to Queen's Park to tell the government that. And so instead of allowing the bill to follow the normal process, they wouldn't allow it to go to committee, which is the moment where the public can come and share their thoughts on legislation. Instead, they rammed it through. There was no committee study. There were only 2 hours of debate at third reading. And then the Conservatives passed the bill. So it became law as of last Wednesday. But that doesn't mean that the fight is done, because we know that local voices are so important. We know that students should have a say in their education, that parents should have a say in the education of our children, that local community voices matter in local schools. And we also know these supervisors have made it clear they're coming for the negotiated rights of workers. So we need people who are democratically elected, who are accountable to communities, who understand that collective bargaining is a constitutionally protected right to be bargaining on behalf of our school boards. So I encourage you to get involved in the fight against Bill 33. It's not over just because the fight at the legislature is over. We need to get this bill repealed. So I'm going to share a link in the chat in a moment, but I encourage you all to send an email to the Minister of Education and the Premier calling for the repeal of Bill 33. Also contact your local MPP, particularly if they are a Conservative MPP, and tell them you don't support this bill and you want to see them repeal it, because it's that kind of pressure, hearing from people across the province, that is going to make the government back down and finally respect the rights of students and workers and parents and communities to have a say in our local schools.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions here.
Hello, everyone. Have a good evening. I am Mark Kidd, and I'm an executive member with the Upper Grand Occasional Teachers Local. And we have a question that asks, can parents sign the petition? If so, can you send a link? Which you just did. Thank you.
Yeah, just to be clear, this one is the email campaign, so please send the email. We do have an updated petition, which I don't have the file handy for, but I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and I can also send a copy to the organizers to distribute, because if you collect signatures on a paper petition, I can stand up and present that in the legislature and demand that the government repeal. It's just two different ways of making sure that they hear from you about repealing this bill.
Thanks so much. And the other question is just, if we wanted to have casual conversations with parents and other colleagues, how can we talk about how the impact of Bill 33 and the next steps to take?
I think it's really important to talk about the importance of local voice in schools so that people understand what kinds of decisions we're talking about. You know, it can be as simple as, what kind of bus route will your child take to school? And will that be decided by local people, or will that be decided by a conservative politician who's never been to your area and does not know it at all? You know, will your child have access to an EA? That's being decided by somebody who doesn't even live in your community. And the thing about Bill 33 is that not only does it not require the supervisor to consult with parents and communities, not only does it not require them to be transparent, there's also zero accountability. So we can't remove the supervisors from office. Only the Minister of Education can. We can't even challenge the decisions in court. They are basically kings in our education system. So I think it's important to explain those stakes to parents and to find an example or two that might resonate with them about why they would want to have a say in their child's education. You know, I speak to people in Ottawa who aren't necessarily happy about things that the OCDSB decided in the past. But we had the opportunity to hold those trustees accountable through the next election. And when people understand they might not have been happy about that decision, but the next decision affecting their child, they're going to be powerless to do anything about that. They don't support this bill. Nobody wants to lose their voice and their right to have a say in their child's education.
Thank you so much for your time. We do have a couple more questions for you, but we will move it to the general just because we do have another timed item here. Thank you so much. All right, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, David Mastin. Thank you. David Mastin began his teaching career in 1995 with the Durham Board of Education, now the Durham District School Board, after graduating from the University of Toronto. Mastin has represented the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario members both locally and provincially since 2002. At the Durham Teacher Local, he served as local treasurer, secretary, political action chair, second vice president, and first vice president before being elected local president in 2015. Mastin also served the local as chief negotiator and was a member of all local committees as well as the bargaining team. Mastin was first elected to ETFO's provincial executive in 2013. He was elected vice president in 2019, and at the provincial level, he has also served on the Provincial Representative Council Steering Committee and was a past member of the Teacher Education Faculty Liaison Committee. On August 13, 2025, he was elected president of ETFO, serving 83,000 members. Welcome, David Mastin.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here with you all. And I appreciate also having the opportunity to listen to both the previous panelists. Both Linda and Chandra are really amazing advocates. Excuse me, I'm trying to recover from a cold, so my apologies for my voice. Both are really amazing advocates, and it was a pleasure listening to both of them. Linda, I really appreciated little walk down memory lane, listening to stories about the late 90s when Mike Harris was the premier of the province, when things really started to slide as you described. Education became a target. It became an expense rather than an investment, and subsequent governments since that point have worked on a similar program of austerity, of trying to siphon money off of public education, trying to return tax dollars back to citizens, It seems to be a predominant theme, not just here in Ontario, but in a lot of neoliberal states. So it was good to hear about that. And, you know, the Bill 160 that you referenced in 1997, teachers walked out across the province for 2 weeks during that time. And it's a really important history to talk about. And I'll get to today's context in a minute, but it's very connected to this. In 1997, all teachers, every teacher in public education walked out of their classrooms for 2 weeks because of Bill 160. And Bill 160 was not a bargaining issue. It wasn't about salary. It wasn't about prep time. It wasn't about class sizes. It was about the democratic control of public education. And prior to Bill 160 passing, local school board trustees had the ability to make decisions for their own communities, had the ability to raise taxes based on their own communities, based on what those communities wanted to see in their classrooms. And it was a time where there was local control. Bill 160 came along and sucked all that control to the province, save and except for a couple of small pieces. And those small pieces were the election of local trustees and the ability still at the local school board for some types of independent decisions up to and including local bargaining. And there are 2 tables where bargaining takes place right now. And local bargaining right now still takes place at the local level with elected school board trustees being the ultimate ratification for the school board of those deals. So why does that history all make sense now? Because this government, this Ford government, has in their very brief tenure gone back to the future and decided to reopen some of the wounds that were not fully healed from the Bill 160 days. And they're trying to finish the job. And Bill 33 is a big step towards finishing the job. And certainly the rhetoric of Chandra moving forward, he seems intent on removing trustees entirely from school boards. And it has to make you wonder, what's the point of a school board if trustees are going to be removed? These would turn into satellite offices with full ministry control and nothing that's locally connected and locally relevant. So it's a major democratic problem, and it's finishing the job that Mike Harris didn't finish in the late 1990s. And Chandra, you talked a lot about what I would want to talk about, the state of public education here in Ontario. And I'll just focus on educators for a bit. ETFO represents 84,000 members. Most of our members are permanent teachers. We have a lot of occasional teachers. And those occasional teachers can work either as long-term occasional teachers who are filling in for a longer stretch of time when a permanent teacher is absent, or daily occasional teachers that work on a day-to-day basis, can go from different schools on a day-to-day basis. Very, very, very challenging jobs, certainly. And we've also got a number of education workers. We've got some early childhood educators and some educational support personnel and professional support personnel. And all of our members are struggling. This government, as has been mentioned, has siphoned $6.3 billion out of public education since they came to power, which is an immense sum of money and has real life on the ground impacts. And our members are frustrated. Kids are struggling. The teachers and the educators who come into this profession with an intent to make this world better, to help kids achieve their very best, are not able to have their kids achieve their very best because the resources are not there for that to take place. And our members are getting burnt out, and they're leaving, and they're leaving in droves, actually. We've got a real redundancy, or we've got a real a retention issue. Our members are not sticking with the job because it does not satisfy them. It does not fulfill what they expected when they entered this profession. We've got so many qualified teachers across this province that are not working. And yet we've got some school boards, and Ontario Northeast is one of them, where in the elementary panel, we have permanent jobs being given to people that have no certification in the teaching profession. And it's an absolute shame that we're in this position, but that's where we are right now. And it's not because we've got a shortage of qualified and certified teachers. It's because we've got a shortage of good quality jobs and working conditions for our educators to work in. And it is an absolute shame. So we're on the precipice of a real crisis. And this government is not looking like they're heading in any direction other than further dismantling. And our deep concern is that this dismantling is a project to try to dismantle the public trust in the public education system so that they can turn this big $30+ billion industry over to private capital so they can turn it into a profit-making machine like they have in many jurisdictions south of the border. And we cannot let that happen. So I won't get into any details about Bill 33. We know about this. There's been a plethora of media, and thanks so much to Chandra and the NDP caucus for raising hell on this issue, and in fact creating a lot of noise up to and including getting booted out of the legislature over these shameful topics that this government is engaging in. You know, even the last week, the not sharing of the EQAO results, which may not seem like a huge deal, but the EQAO agency is an arm's length independent agency that is supposed to be separate from the political machinations of the provincial government. And yet this government has the audacity to say that they're going to withhold those results, not share them. It shows their total lack of any sense of value towards democratic institutions, the separation of an independent agency like EQAO is supposed to be. And by no stretch of the imagination am I suggesting EQAO is a good organization. I think it's a real problem. I think it's short-term, one-picture message that of what's happening on one given day does not provide a full picture, but it's the state that we're in. And for this government to hold back on that, it's just an abomination. So we've got so much work to do. And, you know, all of this talk might make us feel like that there's a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. But I can tell you that there is a growing urgency amongst our members who came into this profession not just to deliver a good program to their students, but also to protect a good program for the future generation of students. And I'm sensing a real conviction in our members to fight the fight. And I'm hoping that that continues. And I'm hoping that there's not a loss of hope, because the hope that we have is in people. It's in conversations just like tonight, where you can listen to people talk about the state of the system and listen to the passion behind the voices who are people prepared to fight for the system. And there is hope there. There's hope in these conversations. There's hope in our 84,000 members. There's hope in the 60+ thousand OSSTF members and OECTA members and AEFO members who all are committed to doing this and creating a good public system and protecting a good public system. So if any of you need any resources on how you can engage in this struggle, certainly OSSTF, AEFO, ETFO, or OECTA all have resources on their website. Ours particularly is in the Building Better Schools section. We have all kinds of resources if you're looking for ways to be involved at a greater and deeper level. By all means, we would encourage you to reach out to those because it's going to be people power that's going to be able to defeat this undemocratic and authoritarian government.
Thank you so much, Dave. You know, you've really highlighted some really important points there about the ways that we're fighting and how to keep researching. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to go to Jay at this time. There was a question in the chat earlier.
Yeah, we're going to come back to a few questions. So we'll open up to David Mastin or any of the other speakers here tonight. What do families, students and school boards and communities lose if the government removes the elected positions of trustees, would you say?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's a huge plethora of answers that you can present to this. I mean, parents of students that are struggling, who are looking for avenues to find resources, accommodations, things that they can do to navigate the system. These are places that the trustees would be the natural go-to. So parents are going to lose that avenue right off the bat. And this new office is going to be nothing more than a call center. I mean, it's going to be shaped like a business call center, and we know how frustrating those can be for all of us. it's obviously the concept of democracy being under attack is a pretty nebulous term. It's big, it's broad, and a lot of people don't talk like that. But just on the ground, having that opportunity to reach out to a human being who has every 4 years that accountability of having to go back and seek re-election, that's the way democracy works. That's the way elected offices work. That's why we have elected people as premier, as prime minister, as all kinds of different, even as union leaders. We have terms, and there's an accountability measure baked into those terms so that it forces you to do your job and to treat people with the respect they deserve. All of that is on the verge of being taken away entirely, not just with Bill 33, but the next steps coming up.
Thank you so much for that answer. Linda, did you want to also reply to that?
Yeah, so it's about values and conversations. I think what gets taken away is the opportunity for mutual dialogue and conversations where my values might be different than someone else's. And what school boards and trustees do very well is creating that safe space to have conversations about equity, about police in schools. And we spend a lot of time in building that mutual understanding and learning and that community. And I think what the community is going to lose is that building of community as a whole. And elections are important. I agree with David completely. It's about putting your values out there. It's about saying, I believe in flying the pride flag. I believe in equity. And Chandra started to speak about TDSB. I was beside myself when colleague trustees in TDSB worked for years around equity, around special programs, and the supervisor comes in and says, no, I'm going to listen to the vocal parents, and it's no longer equity based. The community trusts us as locally elected officials, trustees, or not me, but to think of what's in the good of all, good for all students, not just my students, good for all students.
Thanks, Linda. Actually, Linda, I have another question for you from Aaron with OECTA Wellington. Hi, my question is, Linda mentioned BRICS as well as the 3 pillars of the education system. There is talk about the Conservative government using Bill 33 to sell off school lands to developer friends. Is this something that people are aware of, and is there a way to amplify this idea along with all the other destructive elements of the bill so that the public can be made more aware of just how awful this bill really is? Thank you.
I can respond to that. So in the olden days, as chair of property committee in the Upper Grand District School Board, property would come and we would say, we as a community agree that we're going to sell this. And this is sell so that the money proceedings goes into a fund for future schools, right? For that kind of thing. Legislation was changed by this provincial government that now puts the authority to the minister. So the minister can say, Mark, you're going to sell that property. Not only that, but I'm going to tell you who you're going to sell it to. So that wasn't changed, that was changed post 2022 when I was there, but I know that's there because of that whole, remember I was saying the centralization and the control. I haven't heard of it happening yet, but the groundwork is there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering those questions. We're going to move on to our last set of speakers. Thank you so much. We have Dr. Levac, Dr. Leah Levac. Leah is an associate professor and Canadian Research Chair in Critical Community Engagement and Public Policy at the University of Guelph. She has 2 children who have attended or are attending schools within the Upper Grand District School Board. Her research is guided by a community-engaged approach that recognizes communities and often marginalized members of the public as knowledge holders. She's interested in more engaged and innovative approaches to public policy making, particularly at the local level, and how this can be informed by participatory and inclusive democracy. Before beginning her role at the University of Guelph in 2013, Leah was an elected city councillor in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Welcome, Dr. Levac.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight. And thank you for the introduction. My first sort of admission is that I'm not an education scholar per se, and so this has been equally informative for me tonight, and it's a treat to be in the company of all of this knowledge. So my plan is just to add a couple of little dimensions that I hope might be helpful around thinking about sort of from the position of some of the challenges that particularly the recently passed Bill 33 raises. And then very quickly, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Marcia Myrie-Obi, who is going to talk more specifically about the provisions that call for sort of required relationships with policing in schools and some of the potential consequences of that. So the 2 points that I wanted to make, which I think have already been really well covered, but maybe I'll just, so I'll try and say something that hasn't already been said. First of all, I think that there are some real reasons to be concerned. I agree with the other speakers about the ways in which we're seeing an erosion of democracy at the local level. And a point that I want to add here is that one of the challenges is that although there is not a whole lot of research about the way the public understands and thinks about school board trustees and their roles, what we do know is that about the only level of government that gets worse voter turnout than the municipal level is the trustee level. And that has consequences for the kind of attention that people are paying to during elections. And the related piece of that is that when we look at the limited data that have been explored around the public's understanding of the role of school board trustees, the punchline is that it's not very good. So there's about, I'm thinking of a study here in the early 2020s, led by Anthony Busuttil, who is a professor at Conestoga College, and about a third of the respondents in that survey couldn't really articulate what school board trustees even did. And so I think that's like a sort of a public information problem that we need to think about, because we do know quite well in democracy scholarship that when people are more connected to decisions that are being made and have a stronger sense of power and relationship to their elected officials and see themselves as being active political agents, it increases the sense of legitimacy of those governance structures. The second point that I want to make is that, and Chandra already spoke to this, so let me just add to this dimension around the concern about how we think and talk about the notion of the public interest. So framing issues in public policy as it relates to the public interest is concerning, not only because it places a lot of arbitrary power in the hands of whoever gets to determine what constitutes the public interest, but it's also a really big concern because it significantly impacts people depending on who you are imagining when you are thinking about who constitutes the public. So what we certainly need to be concerned about, and we see this in other pieces of legislation at other orders of government, is that the way that the public gets imagined very often privileges the current status quo arrangement at the expense of other segments of the public who are currently invisible because they are not considered as policy actors, or they're hyper visible because they're the targets of policy, a sort of punitive policy measures. And so this sort of slippery idea of who is the public is, I think, something that we really need to be concerned about. The final piece on this notion of framing what counts as the public interest, I think is deeply concerning when we think about the language that has been used in other provinces to support legislation that that puts trans kids at risk. So there's a particular way of there's been a particular way of talking about that legislation that tries to suggest that parents are the public that the government is concerned about, and that these parents have the right, and so on. You know how the story goes. So the concern in this particular case then is that this notion of the public interest is actually gives a lever for circumventing commitments to equity, diversity, inclusion, because not only will it get used in these particularly pernicious ways, but it will also get used if we think about what's happening in the post-secondary sector, where I also, feel the effects on a daily basis. It will get used to sort of push forward a supposed neutral notion of meritocracy and equality at the expense of thinking more broadly about equity and inclusion. So I'm going to leave it there and I'll pass it over to Marcia to talk more about police and schools and the challenges there. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you so
I'd like
much,
to go ahead and welcome Dr. Marcia Myrie-Obi. Dr. Marcia Myrie-Obi is an adjunct professor of Black Organizing and Resistance in the Department of Political Science at the University of Guelph. Her life and work are an embodiment of dualities and intersections. She's a Barbadian Canadian citizen with an ancestral, cultural, and intellectual home in Africa. Her career unfolds, sometimes spectacularly and sometimes confusingly, at the intersections of activism and education. Welcome, Dr. Myrie.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Leah, for really setting it up. So maybe the best way to think about my brief comments would be, let's use the Black community and our experience of Bill 33 as kind of a case study. So thank you to my friend and colleague, Leah Levac, for being a safe ally to Black people and communities as we continue to struggle for safety, self-autonomy, and to live without experiencing anti-Black racism in Canada, including in the educational sector. Instead of interpreting our concerns with Bill 33, Leah made space for us, and I say us because I have been involved in organizing against Bill 33 within the community in Guelph and the Upper Grand District School Board, to speak directly for ourselves. Acts of allyship are the most minuscule of things, but they are also the most impactful things. In my short time tonight, I want to highlight that Bill 33 is a reactionary bill that seeks to roll back many of the gains the Black community fought for in the days and months after the lynching of George Floyd. After a struggle to get Canada to recognize and address its own anti-Black racism, a struggle which is very generational and very long-standing, by the way, we were able to see a plethora of reports and scholarship that quantified and qualified the unsafety that Black students faced in schools across Ontario and indeed all provinces in Canada, and a move away from carcerality to make schools safer. At the same time, Canada was learning the extent of the horrors done to the Indigenous communities through the mechanism of residential schools. Schools post-colonization were never neutral spaces. Schools are harmful to Black, Indigenous, queer, disabled, and other minority students and staff. As you heard Leah talk about with the trans community, where identities intersect, the harms compound. Bill 33 will be harmful to minority communities, and in particular, it is a direct threat to the efforts of the Black community, who were only able to push back against the last segregated school in Canada in 1983. Where carcerality is a tactic, Black children suffer, and as we know, they also stand to lose life and limb.
Thank you so much, Dr. Myrie. I'm going to go back just quickly to our questions. So Jay and Mark, if we have any unanswered, I'm going to give a moment for that to happen before I thank everyone.
I have a question for Chandra. Chandra, Amy asked, not being able to challenge a supervisor decision in court. That restriction has been written in as part of Bill 33, so even a human rights complaint about a decision they made or a charter challenge would not be able to move forward? Thanks.
So there's a provision in the Education Act, and Bill 33 extends it to these scenarios of supervision as well, that says that there's no court proceeding that can go ahead against a school board that is under supervision. And so even with the TDSB and TCDSB, there were some court cases that were in progress. I couldn't tell you what they're about. I've just, heard from people that abruptly the supervisor gets appointed, it comes to a screeching halt. Now, constitutionally, can the government take away your right to, for instance, have a charter challenge or a human rights complaint? I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say that yes, they can with a simple piece of legislation like this. But what would happen is that first you would have to fight for your right to go to court, and that would have to wend its way through the courts. And if you were granted permission, then you would be able to pursue that case. So effectively, unless you have very deep pockets to hire a lawyer, there is no challenging a supervisor's decision in court, especially if you are just a parent who's seeing your child harmed by a decision that the supervisor has made.
I can ask the next question unless there's any other speakers who wanted to step in, because at the end question Q&A is really open for any of our 5 speakers tonight. All right. The next question is from OECTA. For any of the panelists, has there been any sense of what the costs of these programs will be over time? We know that supervisors are being paid upwards of $350,000 and have an expense account. What will be the reporting office's cost? It seems like the government is spending education dollars that they aren't willing to spend in the classroom and fast-tracking the process of breaking and privatizing education, that, as David mentioned. Would anyone like to tackle that?
Maybe I can start.
Okay.
So we know that the supervisors are getting $350,000 a year, and that is coming out of the school board budget. So that is money that is coming out of classrooms. In, I think, nearly every case, what trustees were earning in terms of honoraria was far less than $350,000 a year. And trustees did not get $40,000 expense accounts. Now, what will the supervisors be spending their $40,000 expense accounts on? We have no idea, because we don't know what they're doing. It's certainly not responding to emails, phone calls, or meeting with parents. So there really shouldn't be a lot that they're expensing, but the government has not committed that those expenses will be publicly reported so that we can see. Paul Calandra also announced these family support offices without saying anything about how they would be funded and who would be staffing them. Which is one reason why, as David says, there's concern that these will be nothing more than glorified call centers. Without knowing who will staff them, it's unlikely we're going to have people who can actually meaningfully respond to someone's request, especially when there's no additional funding that's going. It's going to be 5 business days to get a response saying, sorry, there's nothing we can do to help your child. But if they are actually intending for these offices to be staffed by local board employees, then that's another area where this government's plan is actually taking money out of classrooms, because these employees do not already exist at boards. So where are the boards going to come up with staff for these offices from?
Linda?
Yes, can I just add, it's more than the financial accountability. It's also the evaluation of the value that's added to the system. And I know that when the regional audit committees were introduced for school boards, so we're now part of a regional audit, kept on asking, and how do we know if it's a good thing, the money that's spent on these accountants that are doing these regional audits? And just the example that Chandra talked about, the family person who's answering the phones, it's really important to make the connection to the authority to make change. So as a trustee, we listen to the parents, and one person calls and says, the bus system, I'm a grandparent and childcare. We have the ability to go back through the system, through the school board, to say, I think we need to revisit this policy because it's not matching the needs of the community. So now you have someone, and it's going to be a call center. It's going to be answering the phone, number of calls answered, that's the account, but it's not going to make change in the interest of students and families and communities.
Thank you. I believe we have one more question. Mark?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find it. Has any of this... Sorry, Nick, I see the chat just went down for me.
You can go ahead and ask your question to Dr. Myrie.
Oh, okay, thank you. Dr. Myrie, you mentioned harm to marginalized staff. I feel like this has not been talked about at all anywhere that I have seen. Can you elaborate further, please? And thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think that anybody reading Bill 33 broadly understands that the bill, like I said before, is a clawback of many of the mechanisms of equity, and I think other panelists have said it today as well. And obviously, that is going to be concerning for that should be concerning when we think about the career effects of people who are already in the system. All of the conversation around meritocracy and all of this, it makes teachers who are there because they deserve to be there, because they have worked hard, because they've qualified like everybody else. It sets up this conversation, it sets up this environment where they have to push even harder to prove that they're not the quote unquote equity hires, and all that has and carries with it. But then the work of making sure that representation across school boards is seen to and done, all of that is going to be threatened and under threat. And there are some school boards where we weren't even, up to the levels that were acceptable or desirable for the community. So these are just some of the issues, a few of them that I will mention in the interest of time. But I think that how this legislation is going to affect Black teachers within the system, Indigenous teachers within the system, people who provide care. It's not just teachers, it's the aides and that kind of thing as well. I think that is something that we really need to kind of single out and to spend some time talking about and thinking about as we unpack Bill 33.
Thank you. And Jay, there are some more questions in the chat.
I actually had a question for Dr. Myrie as well. I'm wondering about, we're talking about how Bill 33 will take away the gains that the Black communities have gotten to get police out of schools, and I understand pretty well the harm that it caused as a queer person myself, of having them in there. But I was wondering, sometimes when I'm trying to explain it to people, saying, "Hey, these are one of the issues with Bill 33 is that the police will have access to come back into the schools, gains that have already been made." How can I explain if they don't already have that understanding? What would you have advice for the best way to explain that in a short time that might convince someone?
Definitely. So it is police in schools and police ing schools. Both of them are problematic when you're thinking about minority individuals. So one of the I think the conversation, and this is one that we have had to answer when we were doing community work quite a lot, because people associate the police, the LICE now, with safety, with protection. But that in and of itself is an experience of police that is grounded in a particular positionality. And it is not a Black positionality, and it is not an Indigenous positionality, and it is not a queer positionality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what was really effective when we were having that conversation at the level of the community was to get people to question their own positionality. When you see a security guard in a supermarket, what does that throw up for you? Well, let me tell you what it throws up for me. And you help people to understand, that there are some inherent biases, there's some blind spots that they have. And I think that is really effective. I can remember a particular conversation we had within the community with some parents who were very supportive of Bill 33 because they experienced police in schools as a positive thing. But as we had the conversation, and started to unpack how different bodies experience police, that was very effective. The police in schools, LING, is the example that I use that I think people catch very easily is the conversation that we are having, that we should continue to have, that we should regenerate in the context of Bill 33, is the conversation around residential schools. Because carceral logics and what they do to Black and Indigenous communities, queer communities, disabled communities, the connection between carceral logics and eugenics, I think that is an easy way to get people to understand the ING aspect, where we're not talking just about police bodies in school, but we're talking about the logics that have underpinned white supremacy and white supremacy in school. And I think that the residential school example is recent. We're having that conversation as well, and so it is then easy to say school again, and what school means is different based on positionality. So, people think of when you ask maybe somebody who is not from my community, what does school mean? You will get the kindergarten conversation, the elementary school conversation. When you ask a Black or Indigenous child, what does school mean? Or even a parent, there's a whole set of other things. There's residential schools, there's industrial schools, there are schools that have been used for quote unquote children who don't have the social mannerisms and behaviors. So I think that is a good touch point as well that people can connect to and really understand. And those are two kind of tangible examples that we've been using in community.
Thank you. Mary, I think this is for everyone. Mary asks, how are trustees and boards working to address safety in classrooms and schools under the current model of governance? We know it will get a whole lot worse should a school board supervisor take over this role, but it's already pretty dire. Can anyone speak to the work that is being done to affect change regarding student and staff safety? Thanks, Mary.
Linda?
Yeah, why don't I start? So the first thing I'm going to say is that if a school board is taken over by a supervisor, they're not following the policies and the procedures, as Chandra was saying, whether it's DEI, and equity policies and so on. It's interesting you asked that question, Mary. Just this weekend, had a conversation with a retired EA and a retired teacher, and we were talking about just, like we've gone back in history, back to the Harris days, and David was talking about it, but I remember in the old Wellington days, there were a lot more community agencies out there. And so I know myself, because I volunteer in schools, in the community and so on, a lot of poverty work in the community, you find classrooms where tables are bolted down. You find classrooms where there's no furniture at all because of violence in the school from students. And yes, the staff come in completely wearing, the safety gear and so on. I'm not denying that it's not there. It's absolutely there. But I also want to draw an attention to, in the 16 years that I was a school board trustee, those supports that were in the community, whether they were health, mental health, and so on, have disappeared. Have completely disappeared, those programs and supports. And so when parents, as a school board trustee, they used to come to me and say, I have a right to public education. Absolutely, they have a right to public education, a human right, and it's our obligation to welcome them into the school. The reality is, just like full day kindergarten, those young people are not ready to be in a classroom. They're not ready to be in a classroom to learn in a safe way with students. And it's all I'm going to say is that it's going to continue, because I see more and more of those mental health supports and other supports disappearing from the community that used to be partners in educating and getting kids ready for education. I know that's not the answer you want, but that is the reality of that environmental scan of that program's gone, or that program just isn't there anymore.
Yeah, and if I can, just piggybacking on that as well, I think Linda has really touched on this very appropriately. In ETFO, we talk about classrooms and inclusion models, but we talk about that this can only work when there's proper supports. That you can't have an inclusionary model of education unless the supports are there. And the trustees who are out in each of these school boards right now trying to address the issue of violence and student mental health needs not being met, they just don't have the resources. This government does not provide the resources. And Linda pointed out accurately, the resources are not in the outside communities either. So the schools are left to fend with incredibly challenging circumstances where students have immense complex needs and there's no resources to help those students. So violence is on the rise. Safety issues are at play for both student and for educator. And I know there's a lot of trustees that have tried to do some things in a very creative way to even try to get reporting mechanisms in place so that violence can be reported. And there's roadblocks put up all over the place for those types of things. So for me, the trustee model is the way that could be solved, but it can only be solved with proper investments from this provincial government. Those are not there. And schools should be places where these supports are in place. We can identify the students at a young age. We can provide an efficient delivery of services for students at the school level. And this government's just willfully neglecting that.
If I can just add to what David was saying, when I was with the Ontario Public School Board Association, there's a committee called MACSI, the Minister's Advisory Committee on Special Education. Constantly, trustees were raising at a provincial table directly with the minister and their staff about this issue. And all they do is they take notes. That's it. That's all they do.
We can also see the real risk of this getting much worse under the supervisors that are already in place. When the first thing that the TDSB supervisor did was to put kids with special needs in larger classes, now those kids are having less support to meet their academic and physical needs. And we know that the violence is resulting from unmet needs. So if the supervisor is going to take away supports, the supervisor is increasing the risk of violence. Every school board in the province except one is running a deficit in special education. In fact, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars for the English public school boards alone. It's a deficit of $580 million. So when these supervisors are coming in, and they're, again, bean counters, not people with experience in education or in child psychology, they're coming in and just being told, balance the books, then they're going to start looking at that line as a place to cut to balance the books. One of the first things the Ottawa supervisor said in the audit committee was that the OCDSB was spending so much more on special education than our neighbors. if they're going to keep cutting those supports, if we're going to cut supports to Indigenous kids, then we are going to see more and more needs going unmet, and that is just going to result in more violence. We know from the Ontario Autism Coalition that in the last year alone, there were 100,000 children with disabilities who received supports because of the advocacy of their trustee. So if that family doesn't have the trustee to advocate for them anymore, what kind of support is that child getting? So, you know, the supervisors, it's a scenario of pouring gasoline on what is already a very out of control fire.
Thanks so much. I believe we have one last question.
Okay, I have a question here from an audience member. Who is responsible for figuring out how to obtain these resources, and how do we think outside the box to find the resources?
Well, I'm going to jump in to say I don't think we need to think out of the box. You know, the government has plenty of money when it comes to their own priorities. You know, it's $1 billion to get out of the beer store contract a year early, $2.4 billion to a bankrupt Austrian spa company to build a spa on public land in downtown Toronto that most of us will never visit, $100 billion to build a tunnel under downtown Toronto that's not even feasible. So it's not a question of lacking money in Ontario. It's a question of political will to actually invest in the education system so that we are meeting the needs of every child. And, you know, we've seen this government cut funding year after year. They have not had the political will. We've had an education funding formula in place under the Liberals and Conservatives that deliberately keeps costs down instead of actually funding based on student need. What we need to do is flip it on its head and ask, how much do we need to meet the needs of every child, instead of how much is the government willing to put in a line item in its budget?
I also wanted to say, with the thinking outside of the box is born of privilege. And we definitely do want to make sure that we understand that. We're talking in the context where, again, Black and Indigenous families, queer families, you know, disabled families are dealing with one of the most out of control cost of living in Canada now. The cost of rent, the cost of food means that many people are working 3 and 4 and 5 jobs. And so we want to make sure that education remains a social good, because disproportionately Black, Indigenous families with minority identities need that support from the educational system, or their children are going to, you know, not be able to perform as well in the educational system. So this conversation around thinking about outside of the box and finding these resources, other places, we have to be very careful with that. And Chandra, I just wanted to add to the list that we have also just voted to increase or spend in military budgets in Canada. So this is not a problem of money. This is a problem of will. And like I said, it is a reactionary cutback of EDI and EDI-related issues within the schools.
Thank you so much for your wonderful answers, everyone. We're going to go to a very short 1-minute clip, and then we're going to thank all of our speakers.
And we're back. Let's meet Doug Ford's team of rookie school board supervisors making cuts to our publicly funded schools. Starting with the coaching staff, head coach, Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, with a dismal record of $6.3 billion of cuts to schools while squandering billions on various schemes and scandals. And his assistant coach, Minister of Education, Paul Calandra, who's presided over $800 million of cuts to special ed students in the 2024-25 season. Way to go, Paul. On to the supervisors. First up is Rohit Gupta at the Toronto District School Board. His experience in publicly funded education is a big fat zero. Paul Bonifero takes over the Thames Valley District School Board. His experience in parent-student advocacy comes in pretty low at 0. Next up, Frank Benedetto, presiding over the Toronto Catholic District School Board. His experience in education clocks in at a whopping 0. Robert Planendon at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. His years of experience in publicly funded education, 0. And finally, Rick Byers at the Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board. Experience in education, you guessed it, 0. And there's your lineup of rookies and mismanagers batting against our students in Ontario's publicly funded education system.
We just wanted to make sure you all had an understanding of the wealth of knowledge that these supervisors are bringing to public education. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for taking the time to share your expertise and your insight into what's happening in public education today. Your knowledge, clarity, and commitment helped all of us to better understand the challenges that our schools are facing and the impact these changes have on students, families, educators, and communities. A special thank you to Linda for breaking down bricks, budgets, and bargaining, and for sharing the history of where we've come from, and for really grounding us in the realities behind today's decisions. Thank you to Chandra for highlighting the rise in violence in schools caused by a lack of supports, and for reminding us how deeply our continuous cuts to special education harm students and staff. Thank you to David Mastin for reminding us for what our schools should look like and what we must fight to protect, as well as helping to debunk Bill 33 and its consequences. And a thank you to Dr. Levac and Dr. Obi for speaking so powerfully about public interest and the impacts that these changes may have and have had on Black, Indigenous, and racialized staff and students. We also want to thank the 51 people who joined us tonight. Your presence shows how much our community truly cares about protecting public education. And as a final call to action, we encourage everyone to share what you learned tonight with your friends, your family, and your colleagues. The more people who understand what's happening in our schools, the stronger we become in advocating for the future our children deserve. Thank you so much to all of you, and we hope to see you all again soon. Good night.